Hello, welcome back to the show. I'm DDK. Let's talk some esports.
Franchising in the sense of like unifying a lot of shit we all deal with and we all do, from player contracts and how teams deal with tournament organizers and how tournament organizers deal with players and everything. I think you can clean it up and unify it some without like giving the keys to a bunch of people and locking everybody else out.
That's SirScoots, discussing his insights on the franchise versus free market models, and that in his view, we don't have to move to that franchise model to get a lot of its benefits. We also talk about the state of Counter-Strike broadcasts. Is it what it should be? What are the next steps? We also talk about Quake and Starcraft. Why are they so amazing and where did they go? And what does it take to make a great esport, and so much more. It is a long conversation. I hope you enjoy it. So without further delay, I bring you Scoots. What's your general feeling about live production right now in CSGO?
So live productions I think are, at a great place for esports in general. I mean, we're getting very sports-like in how our product put together for the viewer, both in the arenas as well as certainly when it's put through the broadcast systems put out on the internet and now on TV in some regards even. We're seeing more and more actual TV trucks and that kind of technology being used in production instead of us in the old days figuring out how to fake it to make it look as good as we could, as cheap as we could. Now like it's kind of the same gear that would do a football game or do a major event somewhere, right? Literally the same trucks, sometimes the same crew in the trucks learning about esports. And 2 weeks ago they did, an NFL game. Obviously, you've done E-League stuff. That is a sports company doing it, so their production values are very sports-like. But here's where it gets a little conundrum in the sense of like our earlier conversation about the open market and like dog-eat-dog world of Counter-Strike versus a lockdown developer model like an Overwatch or a League of Legends. It's a very expensive proposition for team owners, for tournament organizers to kind of have to keep outdoing themselves, right? There is a level of diminishing returns there after a while of what money you can get back, no matter how much cooler you make it or add it, if you're not adding stuff that can directly be ad revenue, so to speak. So it's something probably all the tournament organizer would say, like we spend probably too much on our show, but we have to. It's not necessarily, these organizations aren't making millions of dollars every time they do an arena event. So, I think value-wise and like what it looks like and how it's run is getting more and more professional, right? Again, coming from your guys' first event where we were sitting at a little black magic at ATEM and, I was yelling at you guys, literally because we had no voice comm or anything. I was yelling at you because you were 10 feet in front of me, not even that. To, now you guys have full-on studios. You bring in the big trucks when you do your arena events, and that's kind of indicative of everybody in the space. ESL maybe has been going at it a lot longer, but they used to cobble stuff together, and that it's all upgraded, right? And we're not even quite to 4K and stuff yet, but 1080-60 is kind of going through the pipeline. But again, I think sometimes what we do see, Dan, is stuff's being added and it's gimmicky, but it doesn't necessarily add. So let's talk about Counter-Strike. It doesn't necessarily add to the game of Counter-Strike, right? We start to see a lot more augmented reality graphics because that's the next big thing. It's the next big thing in sports, too, because the guy doing the NFL at the half report can walk on a virtual football field in the studio, right? And the guy can run next to him and stuff. So it's that same kind of technology, but some of it's being used gimmicky and some of it's being used for informative and educational, right? And we just got to be careful with where we use that stuff. Analyst desks, never had them 10 years ago, right? We had casters. We had a host, caster. That was it. So the fact we even have analyst desks, and now they're, again, being more and more flushed out with tool sets being used on analyst desks. It's one thing to have, a host and two guys that know what they're talking about, and they're just talking. But we spent years where they would just, okay, here's the player roster graphic. Let's talk about the players. And then the interactiveness was the map veto was kind of live, right? But now we're cranking, like, on a more regular basis, instant replays and replays after the fact that an analyst has picked, and then it breaks down with a telestrator. Those kind of things. Again, getting to the next level of information to the fan. I think those are where I like to see innovation. For years, it's like, why doesn't Yanko have a telestrator everywhere he goes, man? Because that guy would love to go sit in production, pick out things to talk about. If someone just gave him the tools, and he gets those tools now and again, and other analysts now and again, but they're not necessarily standard. Those are the things I would rather have money spent on personally as a hardcore Counter-Strike fan, because I think that's that education and entertainment wrapped up. Like, yeah, you can blow off more cannons when someone wins, and more confetti and more flames and more gobos and moving lights, and make it more like a rock concert to me. But I'd rather have less of that show. I would have it. I would like it, and this is the dilemma of a TO, right? You have to be entertained, right? But sporting events don't entertain the venue like we do, right? Every event, tier 1, is kind of like a Super Bowl, right? Huge opening shows and huge awards and huge everything, right? It's like this thing's never going to happen again, right? And they happen, ESL does 5 of the same events around the world or whatever, that genre, more than that, depending on what brand you're talking about. But you know what I mean? It's a much bigger who than like a Tuesday Laker game, right? But a Tuesday Laker game in LA has a lot of hype, has a full arena, spends a lot less money on the production, still beams it out to the world, and that's maybe more sustainable. But everything we do is like the finals, like the playoffs, and it's not. I don't know if we can tone it down now, but I imagine the TOs would love to pull some of it back now, right? Just because that's what's valuable and what isn't when it comes to really showing the sport. Does that make sense?
It's a really it's a really interesting back and forth in a way, because like you say, it feels like the emphasis hasn't really been put in the right places in some respects. Like, for example, the very first DreamHack Masters we had in Malmö, as you mentioned, Yanko with the telestrator and so on, he's doing the weatherman segment, and we were like, yes, finally this is fresh. This is what we've been waiting for. This is a much better way to deliver the information to the viewers as to what's going on. You can visualize stuff as opposed to just having a bunch of analysts just talking and you having to like imagine things. We're going in the right direction. And then we just don't see it again for ages. And as you say, it's just not a standard. And it's all it is an extra, like maybe one extra pair of hands, one extra technician to, take responsibility over it. Just having that extra monitor. And, I mean, you would know the actual tech behind it better than I would, but that cannot be an enormous investment. But, what is the reason why we aren't seeing some of these investments? Is it something to do with the fact that it's like one of the ways that I look at it, for example, is that it seems that TOs will be in a position where they are trying to get up to the level of the major TOs, so that your ESLs and at this point now your faces and before like the MLGs and the PGLs and so on. And then once you kind of get to that level, to that scale, to that investment, then it's about how can I show off to Valve. And so then everybody's thinking about, okay, we don't want to necessarily do things that everyone has done. We were trying to find something new and flashy. So PGL, they were the first to really experiment with these camera angles, these really flashy sort of fly-throughs and floaty cams. And honestly, a lot of them were kind of hard for me to look at first. Obviously, they refined it over time, but initially it's just like, this is clearly just quite gimmicky. Is it something of the way that that Valve are perhaps communicating to people? Because people are trying to impress Valve. People want to bid for the major, and to do so, they have to show that they can innovate.
I don't know if it's any sort of communication from the Valve folks in the sense of, hey, if you're, and again, you probably can't speak to it, but like TOs would certainly be way more. I'm just saying that because you do work for a TO, but they would know definitely what Valve says. Here's our hit list. These are the 5 things we care about: location, date, time zone. But do they delve down into venue size, how many seats? Do they dive down into that kind of stuff? Like within the show, we want this or that. I don't know if they do, right? I mean, I've had tons of conversations with Valve at events, but never about like what they ask of a TO. I know that, to your point, the TOs do all put together a pitch deck, basically a proposal, and they all sling it at Valve at the majors going, we want one. Here's the cool new things we're going to do. And here's where we kind of want to do it. Like, it's like, again, it's a proposal. But I don't know. Yeah, but I just don't know if within that like request for proposal, from Valve to them, if what stuff's in there and what isn't. We want augmented reality. We want a use of our API on the stage. I don't know if they ask for that kind of stuff, because that is something new. The use of the API over the last couple of years is more and more integrated in both. Obviously, custom UIs have to use it, right, in the sense of the spectator tools that you use in some regards, but also on the stage, above the guys as they die, they catch on fire or whatever, that Those things are all regulated now. Bomb goes off automatically. API grabs it. Boom. Lights go off in the venue. So those kind of things. And again, it's just finding, to your point, like what PGL first started to do, some of those flybys, gimmicky. But then they refined which ones look good on what maps, when to use them, what other things to add to it. Not so gimmicky anymore. Now flows from like break from player camera because it's in between rounds to now we're back in the round. Now we're live again. So they found their rhythm to use the tool, right? Because that's like one thing about broadcasting is obviously it's a creative art, right? It's you're creating this thing, right? But there's so much logic put behind the creativity on the show, right? We're going to go from here to here to here to here to here. Then maybe if this happens, we're going to go here. If that doesn't happen, we're going here. The creativity is what you do within those where you're goings, right? But in the director's minds and in the show flow, like that when to get in game, I'm going to go here. Then I'm going to pull this graphic transition up. Then we're going to go to the fly through. Then we're going to go to the terrorists, right? It's kind of a logic to the creativeness, right? So it's just figured out where those things fit and where they're not overly gimmicky, right? We I think like a prime example of like what got old quick is the Cluj major. For the very first time, the API was used on stage to where it triggered a bomb effect of great intensity, and it was flames. Like it literally, like the front of the stage, just flame cannons in Romania. So like a little probably easier to do than maybe a North American venue in the sense of like these things were hot and loud, right? And after a while, it's like, okay, you cannot do that for 2 more days every time the bomb goes off. That's going to be way too annoying, right? Whoosh. Woo! I don't know, it's just crazy. So it's just figuring out when to use the stuff, right? But again, what I look at, and even if I look at the Super Bowl, and like I look at a lot, I don't watch a lot of sports every day of the week, but I watch a lot of sports as finales, whether it's World Cup stuff, Olympic stuff, Super Bowls, World Series, hockey, Stanley Cups. Like I try to watch, NBA finals. And oftentimes, obviously, I'm watching for the athleticism, but I'm also watching like what new and innovations are broadcast companies doing for those sports, because that's kind of where they would show off new stuff, right? Or it's been refined for the season, they're going to show it. And so I look at what they all do, right? And I think we're, again, very close. But again, I still think that if you look at a standard esports event, tier 1 in an arena, we're still got a kind of a rock show, wrestling, and then sport vibe, right? Sports has less of this show vibe, right? And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's a different thing, right? And we're also obviously sometimes entertaining for much longer in the venue. So maybe you have to be a little bit more like that, right? You're not just going for one basketball game. It'd be like going to watch 3 basketball games in a row. So what would the NBA do in an arena in between all that? How would it be more showy? Would it be more high energy than a regular one gamer? Maybe, right? There's reasons kind of why you want to keep the energy in the room over a long period of time. So that's loud music, that's bumping lights, you can't be just so stoic. Okay, please welcome. Here's Cloud9. Here's Liquid. Oh, they're going to play. So I get it, but I also know how expensive all that shit is, right? It takes a lot of people and all those different things. So, yeah, and we set up, the one other thing I do rant about a lot is we often set up like a concert versus a sport as well in the arena, right? I love when events are in the round, right? Because that feels like a sport to me. That's a boxing ring, that's a pitch, that's the football field, right? That's the basketball court in those arenas. That floor is often one of those sports' floors. But we tend to, and I say we collectively, set up at a corner, right? At an end. It's easier, right? You cut off a chunk of the arena so you can use all of it behind it for production and backstage, secure that whole wing, if you will. Then you've got kind of a U shape in front of you. That's your audience, right? And a floor. But that's what concerts do, right? Sports don't do that. Right? Like International does it, and we've had a few Counter-Strikers that do it, and other events do it. I just like that, right? And to me, that makes it feel more sports-like and less concert-like as well, right? Not to mention that if you do this in a big arena, I'm ranting again, Dan, sorry, get this a live production all the way. Again, these arenas, for the most part, are built to do 2-hour things, right? Concerts, a football game, a basketball game, something in there for a couple hours. Graduation, they're very rarely rented and open all day for events other than esports, really. When you think of like or trade shows even, but but that's usually using the floor space and not necessarily the seating space. Point being, if you set up a typical, rectangular oval arena as we normally do, and you cut off an end of it, and that's where the stage is, then you've got a huge chunk of your audience that has to turn sideways to see the stage, right? Because it's to my left, right? If I'm on the one side of the bowl, only if I'm in the back or I'm on the floor am I straight ahead to the show. Now, yes, they all hang big screens in front of me, so I can look straight ahead and look at the show. But I can do that from home in a way. So it's not like you're like, again, if you go to a concert, everyone is looking at the concert, right? But you don't sit in that concert seat for 9 hours, is my point, right? If you're at outdoor festivals, go all week and all nights and stuff, you know what I mean? But you're standing, right? Or you're sitting on the grass. So it's kind of a weird, like those things can get uncomfortable after a while, is what I'm also saying, when you make people turn to the side to watch something that long. Whereas if you put it right in the middle, every seat in those arenas is aimed to the middle, right? So I'm in there for 9, 10 hours, but at least I'm looking straight ahead, right? I'm not turning, I'm not crooked, you know. And just look at any tape of any of those events where they set up against the side, and like everyone in those huge middle sections is turned, like their whole body is turned in the seat. Anyway, my last rant.
No, it's all good. I actually think that because I mean I'm fine. I'm sitting back listening. I think it would be actually amazing if you started your own podcast as well. To be honest, I think there's a lot of stuff that you can speak to because of the fact that you have a multitude of different perspectives to look at something from, and that's obviously gives you a lot of unique insights, which are really interesting to listen to. And sort of rewinding slightly back, I have to say that in some ways I think I was probably being a bit too harsh, and also I think that one of the reasons that I was too harsh, I think, is that sort of sense of urgency or that immediacy that we want everything to be better just like right now. And I kind of forget sometimes that some of the implementations that I want and that I think are the next step to these live productions to make them much more engaging is actually having proper analytics and having an analytics platform that's not only can help to create an enormous degree of insight, but also having an API that can interact very seamlessly with a broadcast. And that's not really something that TOs are going to be paying to develop, because that's a very costly process. You need to find very specific individuals to develop it, and that is actually happening right now. We do actually have something, and I think it will take time for it to be integrated. It'll take time for people to work out how to sort of put it in. And I think it's actually an issue right now. I don't know if you're too up together with 16.0 and the work that they've been doing, but they have a platform like this, and at the moment they're sort of going business to business, and they're trying to focus on some of the professional teams and so on. But their platform is incredible. It's everything I always wanted in basically being able to pass an enormous amount of data and then having very specific filters for that data, as well as a very large variety of tools to create insights from the data. For example, being able to see to select for only buy rounds, in like the last 20 Astralis demos on Mirage, only buy rounds, only rounds where devices had an AWP, only rounds where a smoke was thrown in this time frame to the AWP, and then you can see the statistical likelihood of the positions that he takes after that and how it affects his rotations, for example. Something to that degree is crazy. And imagine, for example, if we had a tool that's intelligent that can, link straight away to a broadcast, and in the freeze time over each player's head, you can see various statistics that could be pulled from all sorts of things. That maybe it could just be this player's average kills on this map or something like that, or maybe it could be something a bit more deeper from an insight perspective, or maybe in that moment when because it's pretty obvious when, let's say on Mirage, a T side's going to go for an A set piece, you usually have like 15 seconds of warning at the very least before that happens, or even longer. You can quickly pop up a graphic of how often they've been successful with that, but on a percentage basis. Or you can even, there's even more crazy stuff that you can do. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with it, but that's the level of added engagement that is possible through these very complex tools, and we aren't seeing it just yet. But I think that's on the horizon.
Yeah, and I am familiar with the platform. I'm not as in depth as you've probably seen it, but I am familiar with what you guys are doing. And it's kind of a natural progression of what others like, you know, like the idea of Counter-Strike stats goes way back to the days of Got Frag, and like we used to parse stats, again, much like Half-Life TV does now. And these new businesses are kind of the upgrade of gather it. Now, what do you do with it? Now, how do you really gather it, right? And parse it. Because even 16, they're not even the first ones to kind of go to teams and go, hey, we can parse this stuff. We can give you some better analytical data, right? So it's kind of the evolution of basically just grabbing the stuff that you can, right? And it's awesome because the more and more it's refinable, to your point, and then quickly, as in almost instantaneously, uh, can be regurgitated in a graphical format into a broadcast. It is would that's the kind of stuff I want to see, right? Like I'm not a huge bells and whistles kind of guy. I think you need X amount of bells and whistles, but then once you're there, stop that race. Stop the pyrotechnic race, if you will, and let's get into the sports side of it, right? Um, because the hardcore, like the regulars of the restaurant, I don't give a shit if a confetti cannon goes off or a flame cannon goes off. I don't care how big the trophy is. Like, and those things don't matter to me, right? And some of that stuff matters to the player. You need a show, you need a spectacle in some regards, but you know what I mean? Like I want that value when I'm watching, right? And so this latest platform I know is like the most robust that you're talking about, and
it would save analyst desks, I think, because I think analyst desks are so stagnant. And imagine if an analyst has a point to make about, just using Astralis again on Mirage and about rotations. And you can see, and this is actually a crazy thing that they've done. They've actually gone like 100% of the way with their ambition with it. And like one of the most expensive thing in their project is that they store all the demos locally, and they have this instant demo player. So if you're looking at a particular player and you go to a specific round where that's what the filter has given you is like a couple of these rounds, and you pick one, it then shows you within the time frame that action or thing that you want to see has happened. It shows you the POV if they have it.
That is crazy.
Which is crazy. Which means that on an analyst desk you can have like just at the tip of your fingers just an incredible amount of visualization to complex points of what's really going on.
Then the analyst's job is going to become knowing the tool set, therefore knowing what to get out of it, and then preconceiving based on the matchup what kind of stuff would be good to pull to talk about before the match. And you could even define that once the map and pick a ban starts happening, right? You could, again, a lot of cool stuff beforehand, and then obviously when you're watching the match as an analyst, you now have this whole tool belt on to back up any kind of point or any new point that you might now be able to make, because you can pull a visual to go with it, right? And that's also part of it too. Like, it gets boring when it's just a couple guys. Like, regular TV hates when like they just sit on something. They like to jump everywhere, right? Because people kind of have short visual attention spans, right? So that's why there's lots of cut. You go here, you show this, go bring a graphic up, back to here. Even though you're in the same segment, you're kind of bouncing around, right? You're keeping it lively. So again, throw some in-game, have these guys talking over it, running these new stats. Then the problem becomes when analyst desks don't get enough time, right? In our sport, that often happens where the analysts have 2-3 minutes and then it's maps and away you go, right? Because again, it's a tight schedule. So the other side of this coin is, if you're going to have cool tools, you have to block out time in the show to properly use them. Otherwise, that's kind of unfortunate too, right? And I know things run late and all those, but
what's the solution, Scott? Because we've had this problem for so long that analysts already don't have enough time. We don't even have any tools for them to use. So, and I think so many people have been racking their brains. How do we, like, what do you do to fix this? And there's no tournament organizers that are really trying to address the status quo. Do you have any insight as to how you even fix this?
It ends up as part of the much bigger conversation about production and costs as well too, right? I mean, they're trying to get as many games in per day, and we've lessened that, right? We're not doing 4 BO3s anymore at top levels. 3 sometimes, but man, that's scary. That's dangerous unless you're doing it in a studio setting where there's crowds, kind of thing. So I think part of it is the long day already, right? If we could get away with, a fan base that was a-okay with rolling in for one match, one best of three in an arena consistently, and maybe two, then you probably in your broadcast day could block proper timeout for the pre, the post, the in between maps. Where it seems like it seems like you all have plenty of time when your schedule is pretty light, one or two best of threes. Seems like that broadcast day allows for proper analyst desk, right? It's when you add the third best of three that everyone starts trimming quickly because you don't know how long it can go, right? And so you have to not give those 15 minutes between each map or before each matchup, even because that could add 3 hours by the time you get to that third best of three. And now you're in your first, you know what I mean? Those overtimes and all that. So that's the first thing is if you limit the maximum broadcast day by how many matches you even put on the calendar that day, the more wiggle room you've got for longer matches. Because again, we don't have a game that has a set time like sports does. Other than sports have pretty set times. There are timeouts, there are overtimes and stuff, but it's pretty dialed in a lot of regards. If you're from the broadcast perspective, how long will a baseball game go? How long will it? I mean, there's so much data that they kind of have a window, right, of that kind of stuff. But again, like you could have three best of threes that go 2-2-2-2-2-2-2. Sorry, that would be four. No overtime. It's pretty easy matches, and then it's wow. But you could have three best of threes that go to three every time, and have two overtimes in every best of three, and that is like adding a whole other series, right? So I think it starts with having a. I think it starts with this is again it's pie in the sky, Dan. It starts with planning your perfect match down to the minute, right? We're going to open with this, and we're going to have this long for the analyst desk, and it needs to be this long because of these tools, right? We're going to have player intros this long. Like you lay out the ideal best of three where everyone gets enough content on the table. And then you put as many of those in that you can do. And hopefully it's at least two, right? And because I think that's kind of like, again, we had a saying that show is king, right? Like the reason we're all here is for the show, for the thing. So it's got to be the most important thing we're doing, right? So that is part of the show. And for us, it is, like I would say for most, at least fairly hardcore Counter-Strike fans, like we'd all love that analyst section to be not so quick and not so the same stuff we've heard over and over because we all watch, all the time. So I've heard Thorin say the same stuff for many years, and now Yanko, and now Sponge, right? Because there's only so much without, again, more to dive into. They're going to kind of give the same couple layers of the onion every time, right? Oh, here's Fnatic and Nip. All right, well, here's what we always talk about. What's a little unique this time? But it's, you know what I mean? But you got to, if you give the analyst desk 5 minutes, you're going to get very basic shit. If you give them guaranteed, you guys got 15 minutes, and it turns into, okay, how do we fill our 15 minutes? We're going to do this, this, and this. You're going to get more out of it, right? If you give them a weatherman segment by a TV, you're going to get some cool shit out of that. But you got to block it in, and you got to be willing to not cut it. Because again, it probably less now than when I started. Because I was hosting kind of at the beginning of Go, and so there was a lot of learning from TOs on just how to do stuff, right? Gfinity didn't really know how to live stream. You guys were learning how to do live streaming with a different kind of game. And I mean, ESO was shifting to a different, you know what I mean? Different levels of learning to do different parts of a show. But so many times we were the first things to get cut. Yep, no analyst section. We're just going to go straight to the casters. Or, Scott, you're going to do it really quick. Just get the predictions. And, like, we would get pissed. We'd be like, man, you're paying us all good money. Why are we here? Make it part of the show. Eat the 5 fucking minutes. 5 more minutes, right? Eat the 10 minutes, right? The people that are watching, like, if you let us give it to them something good, they're going to be okay with it, right? But that we're the first thing to go, right? They can't cut the cast, And again, those are back in the days when we were cramming in 4 best of 3s, And so by that second best of 3, if you're running late, you'd be like, all right, well, sorry, guys, this is a quick one, so I'm going to ask you this. We're going to get right into the veto, right? Because we got no fucking time. You've been on those desks, right? And you've certainly been sitting at the caster side waiting to get thrown to, and it's just very speeded up. So less matches a day and a better thought-out, rounded show, right? I thought E-League, although their shows were tight for TV, was a very well put together show the few times I did it, right? Like they knew exactly what they're going to do every second, and they didn't cut it. They were short. Like again, you ask anyone who worked E-League, we'd want more time to talk about stuff. It was too short of a desk segment, right? Same kind of problem. But it was like clockwork. Boom, 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 boom. You know what I mean? I mean, again, that's because that's years of TV production, right? On how you do run-throughs and how you time shit and where you put your B-roll and your other content. Anyway, and everyone's getting there. Don't get me wrong. Like all shows are fairly similar now. But yeah, I think if we trim the day, then you can lengthen the segments, right? Simple as that. But that all costs money, right? Is that one more back to the money and the TOs not making a whole lot of money on these events? Is that one more arena day? Is that 2 more arena days? Is that too many that have to happen like in group play that the audience doesn't see? Like because again, the longer they pack it in, the more t-shirts they sell, the more food they sell in the venue. Everything is more too, right? The more they get out of the equipment, the more they get out of the crew for that day. So it's not an easy answer, right? It's a really we're at a production level that is really, really expensive. To the point, I'm going to bring this up before we move on because this is breaking news. Riot has their world championship coming up. Riot, right? Runs a franchise league, right? Big eSport LCS, right? They, for logistical financial reasons, are keeping their North American, they're broadcasting the games from Asia. I think somewhere in Asia is the final. I don't think it's Europe. I think it's Asia. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But they're doing, since they have a studio and they have full facilities in North America, LCS studios, they're remoting. They're basically remoting it. So the analyst desk and the casters will be calling the games from NA, and camera shots of the audience, probably a stage host, and the players will come from the event itself, right? Crazy. That's Riot doing that.
Yeah, it's mad.
So, yeah.
I mean, as a commentator, it's just really unimaginable. I mean,
and that's a totally different problem. Like, wait, you want me to work the Super Bowl of the game I love? These are people that work for them all year round, and I'm just gonna come to where I go every goddamn Monday. What? Meanwhile, like there's a stadium full of 80,000 people. Like Bird's Nest was last year, right? So like wherever it is this year, I mean, how? Yeah, forget like them because I'm bringing it up because it's them saving money, right? No hotel. That's a lot of plane flights over there. It's a big crew, right? It's a whole other setup of production gear to facilitate broadcasting them live from there too. They can do it lighter if they don't have all this stuff there. It's like, you have to worry about producing kind of a stage and not the analyst area and the broadcast, the casting areas and all those different things. So, but to your point, if you're one of those talent, that is a kick in the dick. Like I would be so bummed. I'm like, wait, I worked all year to do the big final worlds. It'd be like if they did the international, like in Seattle in a ballroom somewhere, the talent only. It's just like,
I think
what are you doing?
Like one thing as well, the major for your profession, especially if you're a commentator, the major is the major for the players, but it's also the major for the commentators too. And not only in this sort of egocentric way where it's like, oh, I just want to be there in all the action and I can do a better job. It's that obviously that obviously reflects on how the broadcast sounds, and it's much more hype for the viewers. But also it is like you do go the extra level, not just because of the crowd, but because you look at it like it is that one tournament that it is your international or your major as a commentator. Like these are the moments that will get played for the next months and months and months. Everyone who looks at me from a professional standpoint is going to judge me based on this one performance that I might have. And so you put everything into it. So like having that taken away from you, it's got to suck.
And like, because we've worked events where our areas weren't inside the venue. They were like down the hallway, or they were tucked in. Like you've worked out of a locker. We've looked out of locker rooms. We've worked out of foyers. So not even being in the big room, but being in the arena, we were always like, oh, this sucks. Like, because like you want that desk in the goddamn crowd, man. Like that MLG event those other events, like it's so different. So it's not even, they're not even in the venue, right? They're not even in the country. They're not even in the continent, right? It is just like, are you kidding me? So yeah, and the energy level. So and even because even if your desk is in the locker room, that day when you weren't working, you could at least go sit in the venue and watch the match before you felt part of the experience. But yeah, so now they're just going to be thousands of miles away. So no, we'll probably move on from this, but no easy answer for these tournament organizers. I hope they've all feel they've gotten comfortable with their production now, that they can start to look and where they can trim back on some of these maybe showy areas and put that budget more towards delivering a different kind of product now. We've got the basics down. We all stream well. Shit doesn't go down very often. We light it up. You know what I mean? Like all the basics are kind of being ticked on a more regular basis. Now let's spend that money towards the tool set and not the show. We'll see what you guys do at the major. I'm very excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's really interesting as well. Just again, sort of as you say, moving away from this point, but as a one of the final thoughts on it, the fact that we had this situation whereby you were talking about everyone, all the TOs sort of trying to share pieces of pie, but at the moment, like no one really wants to give away a piece of the pie, and unifying the game and having like a sort of mass change to the ecosystem is really what's required, I think, to take the next step. And I think you're very right with that. And I did always wonder if the sort of financial factors would eventually price some people out, and sort of in that sense forcibly mean that there's only a few major TOs left. But I'm not sort of privy to how the investment is working or how the financials are. Do you have a quick take on whether that's a likelihood? Do you think people might get priced out? Because as you say, like things are getting more. The standard is getting more and more expensive. Is it just more and more investment? Is it just is it just level in that way, or?
Well, I think you've got some TOs that have gotten investment that are eventually like so ESL and and DreamHack got investment a while ago, a couple years ago. So now their challenge is to start not the books have to look good, right? Or they're going to have to trim somewhere. Is it do they trim do they trim an event off the calendar, or do they trim stuff off events, right? There's two ways to trim your budget, right? And I don't know their books to know which way they would go. I mean, with Counter-Strike, obviously, it's an incredibly popular game in the sense of viewership numbers. So the TOs like it like that, right? We have a good base that always tunes in. I think it's a very expensive sport if you're a team owner and a tournament organizer, right? The players demand a lot from tournament organizers when they go to events, and they're very expensive salary-wise, tier one. So I think natural selection is going to hit probably a little bit more on both sides of that. I think you'll see teams that decide that, this investment might not be for us right now. We might be overspending in this division, so we might see some team brands pull out. And I think we've seen natural selection and team brands pull in and pull out. And I think we'll see that with tournament organizers. Like Gfinity is a prime example of they tried tier one, decided to kind of step down and change the way they did stuff. And we don't really see them in the tier one of Counter-Strike anymore. But then you guys get bigger, you start doing more, and here comes Refresh, a brand new company going, yeah, I know you guys are all like fighting over this shit, but guess what? Here we come. Like, because they're coming when it's already busy, right? But they see the concept of doing their events slightly different as their way in, right? We're not just going to be the same thing. We're going to have a different format. We're going to do this differently. And again, like, are they all chasing their tails, Dan, too? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what their ROI is like or what it'll be like in 2 years even. But I get nervous that everyone might be overspending a little bit and chasing something that might not pay out what they all think it will, whether it's Counter-Strike or some of these other games. I don't think it's a bubble. I don't think we're in some weirdness. But there's a whole lot of investment. And some of these teams and some of these tournament organizers, valuations on paper are crazy cool in the sense of how much they're worth. But
it's inflated, right?
I just don't. Yeah, I just don't know if the ROI is there yet, right? Or if the investment that then comes based on the valuation will bring the necessarily internal money spent to then bring the ROI it needs to be. It's again, no one's ever. This is all new still. right? This entire industry just keeps getting crazier and crazier and bigger and bigger and better, but it's all still new. You can kind of look at sports, you can kind of look at entertainment, but like it's just kind of nutty. So, but I think we'll see new teams come and go as well. Like I've had some big brands some reach out to me and say, hey, we want to talk to you about this game you keep like bitching at us about, like EG. I've been giving EG a shit for years. Like, why don't you guys have a Counter Strike? They want to talk to me. They want to get a little inside scoop on like what's a CS scene like, right? Because they don't, price ranges are variable. The ecosystem is crazy. So I think again, you'll see some turnover. I guess would be the easy way to put it. New coming, old leaving. I like the idea. Again, I've always ranted that I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of a franchise system, but that has to be kind of run by your developer because they own the IP. You can't really steal a game away from a developer and franchise and lock everybody out if the developer doesn't want you to. So it's kind of got to be developer driven in our space. I don't think it works for this game, right? I think it would be it would do the top 16 owners that are in it better, probably more stable, but the other 30 owners and the rest of the tournament organizers that weren't part of the process, that would suffer, and so it would lessen the game, I think, in a lot of regards, because we've spent so many years building up to here. We're not a brand new thing.
You think that would lessen the game? Because that's obviously one perspective, but as you say, like if you do have this, 16-team system, and maybe you have like this sort of combine type thing that like the Overwatch League has, where you can, or like we have that sort of organically, with stuff like FPL and so on, where you can find new talent and feed new talent through. Is it really a big cost, or is it sort of apples and oranges?
Yeah, well, but okay, so the FPL happens right now, right? So if FPL was the only thing that was happening, let's just use Face It. Let's say Face It killed everybody. wrong thing to say. Yeah, wrong thing to say. Don't mean it that way. Let's say you somehow ended up on the top of the heap, right? But there's 9 other Face Its, right? There's 8 to 10 tournament organizers that are pretty tier 1 that do Counter-Strike in a various level, right? Might be 3 events a year, might be 7, 8 events a year. We would lose them, right? You can't have because we kind of have in a weird way, Dan. We already have 2 franchise leagues running. We have ECS and we have EPL, right? They are basically locked in rev share, partially owned leagues by teams and tournament organizers with a slight relegation system, right? But the relegation system started after everybody was already in the club, right? You didn't wipe it clean and go, okay, we're throwing a tournament to see who can be an EPL team. Teams are invited. Same with ECS. So if you take one of those and go, this is it. ECS is our Overwatch League, is our LCS. Valve loves us. You're all done, right? Then the money that ESL and DreamHack and everybody else that is not you, that they spend in the ecosystem goes somewhere else because they will leave, right? You can't have a franchise league and not lock it down because the idea of monetizing it is you are the only game in town. That's why there is one NFL in the States, not 2, right? So the consolidation and the tying it all to one big product is where that group will make more money, right? But since our game is already so big, the people that you are kicking out of the ecosystem is far greater, right?
Interesting, yeah.
Again, like we talked about, like almost 5,000 kids last year playing Counter-Strike won some prize money. That will dramatically reduce if you lock it all down because less guys will share the pie. Now, the team owners within the franchise, certainly more stable, and in their minds, absolutely, they would rather go that way, right? Not every team owner, but if you ask a bunch, especially North American ones, especially ones that are currently franchised in other games, it adds stability. It adds long-term partnership with your game owner and the other teams, and they go sell big sponsorships and big TV deals. Again, so for that club, that esport would rock and roll, right? But the vastness of Counter-Strike, you're alienating so much, you're turning off so much to do that, right? That I think you hurt the sport at this point, right? I think you're much better to figure out how these big boys can maybe play together. Maybe it's a global circuit where it all works together. So a Faceit event leads points to something that an ESL, like something that everyone has talked about forever and even had PRs about. So we're going to work together and have a unified system, but it never really happens, right? I think franchising in the sense of like unifying a lot of shit we all deal with and we all do, from player contracts and how teams deal with tournament organizers and how tournament organizers deal with players and everything. I think you can clean it up and unify it some without like giving the keys to a bunch of people and locking everybody else out.
I really like the points you're bringing up, because it's because I think, especially some of the statistics that you use, saying, how many like how the distribution works for prize money to so many different players, and how we have the greatest distribution, and we had the, like, you're basically talking to all of the benefits and the pros of the free market system, and there's a lot of issues with it, and it takes a lot of time to sort itself out, and it also takes a lot of time to really see the growth and like what the growth can be from where we are now, and obviously the franchise system, it just sounds so good. I think so many people are tired of this all of these issues that we have, like the oversaturated schedule, the issue with all the TOs fighting each other, the issues where innovation in some regards is blocked just because, again, like the way in the way that some of the competition is operating, and so it just feels like, well, if we had the franchise, then everything would be simple, we wouldn't have to worry about all these issues. But as you say, like the long-term growth, that's like the question. And because anything that's long-term is very intangible by nature, it's very difficult sometimes to have the perspective. So I like that you did speak to that, because I think at the moment, a lot of people, especially I've noticed it on social media, are supporting the franchise idea. I mean, obviously it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and we have no reason to believe that Valve are suddenly going to be like, we're going to take over, boys, because they do you have any insight actually as to why it is that Valve themselves seems so hands off with CS:GO and in other titles? Because this is always a common question. It's like, well, why is it that the Dota looks so different to Counter-Strike?
I other than when I ask them, because the guys all come to the major, and I always chat with them about a variety of stuff, and we always bring it up. It's like, where's our international? Why does it feel like it's two different game devs? People that Dota and Valve, or Dota and Counter-Strike, aren't even made by the same company. It's like, right, in the sense of how they embrace their esports. And certainly when we started getting majors and stuff, right, I was like, oh, this is how it starts, right? This is their. And then our majors we had majors before Dota had majors, right? They took our majors, then made the majors of Dota lead to the TI with a whole invite system, right? So I was like, oh, shit. I wonder if we're then going to get our majors leading to a TI, and we just never did, right? We get 2 majors a year. So asking them, they kind of give the company line that, every game kind of runs their own thing, much like the Valve ethos that you work where you want, a lot more people on the Dota team. It's a lot more popular game. So there's a lot more to the esports people that work over there, and Counter-Strike's a smaller team, and so it's more focused on the overall game and less on the esports side. If 20 people all of a sudden want to work for Counter-Strike esports, maybe they all would. I don't know how much that is true or not, and I don't know why they keep it so separate, because I sit here, like, again, we're just the international descended, right? And like, I look at the idea of the compendium that they do and the amount of money they crowdfund, not only for themselves, but for the, obviously, Valve makes a boatload of millions on the compendium, and then a chunk of it goes to the players too.
It helps everyone, right?
Yeah, so it's not like they're losing money, right? It helps pay for their production and their broadcasts and everything. So why they did the esports case and then never really went past it and never really flushed it out even further than those cases those first couple times, and never really continued to figure out how to take the same concept of like crowdfunding a fan base. I don't get it. I just don't get it, right? And again, this time at the major, I will ask them again, because if they did a compendium, and they have to do something different, right? It's a different kind of game, but they could do a compendium where like VIP mode shows up if we hit $10 million or something, right? I don't know if we would give as much money as Dota, because it's a much bigger probably game overall globally, and it's an ongoing thing, this compendium, right? But I guarantee, we would raise the prize purse of every goddamn major by a lot, right? By a lot, like in a heartbeat, right? So I don't know why they don't flip the crowdfunding switch, regardless of what, other than they do for like obviously the team stickers and the player autographs, but that doesn't generate any publicity buzz for the tournament because it doesn't add to a prize purse, right? That's what helps the international. Oh my God, it's 20 million. Oh my God, it's 25 million, right? So you know, if they figured out a way to, like, again, let the fans, not only, it's great, don't get me wrong, supporting the teams and supporting the TOs and supporting the players with those in-game items is freaking awesome. Another thing, like watching Dota again, I always get reminded. I go, oh, look at that EG banner right there by their home base with their logos of their biggest sponsors on it. How cool is that? That's going to be shown for 40 minutes in game. How awesome is that for these teams? They could tell their sponsors if they make the international that their logos are in game, right? Why hasn't the Counter-Strike devs thought about for these premier events figuring out a banner in T and CT spawn or something like that? Because that would make Jack's life easier as a Cloud9 nerd. He's got just one more place that he's got those logos, right? Those kind of things, right? Those don't. Those are cosmetic. They don't affect, but they go a long way to a team owner. That's for damn sure, man. So I don't know. It's on my list to ask him again. I don't know why it's so separate because I know we would all give money. We'd all use whatever crowdfunding thing they did, right? If they, and they have to be careful. Like I just thought off the top of my head. Well, if they let me put $5 on my pick'em on my skins and let that money go to but then I'm gambling, right? But if I had to pay to do something, right, and they just took a slice off of that and it added to the prize purse, because people, it's the same weird thing as when people donate on Twitch to people, right? Because part of it is you want to see it happen, you want to get your recognition, but you also want to see that number grow. We want to be part of that growth. And our fans, like the Dota fans, love seeing that they broke the record again, right? And I just think I think our audience would love to help, right? And that would Valve gets a slice of all that shit, right? So I don't know, Dan.
Yeah, it's just such a good feeling of like being a part of something that's greater, and it's funny because especially when we see that image of and we see not only the image, but I think we've known from the start that Gabe Newell, who is absolutely the face of the company, he's pushing Dota like it's the straight A student, and CS:GO, totally. We're just like the nerd in the basement playing D&D with Dorito stains on our shirt, like just being forgotten and abandoned.
And I haven't compared our Steam stats. Like I don't know how much smaller we are as a game to them in the sense of like a player base. But like if you look at esports earnings for the last forever, it just take away the excessive international and like we're 1 and 2 and 3 every year right there with Dota and League for prize purse. So without their, on an even ecosystem, again, taking out the prize funding of the international, we're right there with Dota all the goddamn time. So it's not like we are the stepchild when it comes to what the rest of the world is doing with the game in regards to esports, right? So yeah, I just don't know why.
I can give you the numbers quickly. I just Googled it. So today the peak for Dota 2 was 730,000, and the current players right now it's like 10 p.m. in Europe is 445,000, and the peak for Counter-Strike today was 425,000. So that's only a 300,000. I mean, it's not an enormous difference, and the current players is 346,000.
So their peak was far larger than ours, but other than that, not much different.
And I suppose like because we're talking about current players versus peak, yes, Asia, absolutely.
Yeah, because obviously they play Dota and League way more. Played it.
And it's growing in Asia as well. I mean, it was an interesting step, having a Perfect World. He was sort of the
now that it's out there and available, right?
Yeah, they're the representative of Valve over there. For CS
I just wish they. Because again, it's definitely on my list to talk about. Because again, in this ecosystem where team owners are worried about, are they paying too much? The revenue streams, like we need to ponder all these ideas to make, try to get as much money for all sides of this pie, right? Or again, we'll see some drop off. And again, I think natural selection. If you're gonna, here's the thing on franchising, right? Versus natural selection, like natural selection will keep team owners competitive. We'll keep tournament organizers competitive, and we'll keep players competitive, right? once you're in the NFL, you cannot. I mean, you have to sell, or you have to break the law, right? You're not going to lose your spot. Once you have an Overwatch spot, once you pay that money for Overwatch, you can't get relegated. You would have to sell your spot, or again, break all Blizzard's rules to lose your spot, right? That doesn't enhance competition at the end of the day, right? Like this open market does, right? Open rankings, all these kind of things, right? And again, not to say that there's not a place for franchising, but to me, it just leads way more to a game that's brand new or not developed yet. And you can get those legs under it versus this spider that Counter-Strike already is, right?
It's quite smart, really, because it's such like looking at all the VC that's coming in and just the investment in general. Like investing into a franchise team is just so much safer for someone who is rich and just wants to shove their money in.
Yeah, yeah. And again, and that's why I don't necessarily poo-poo the model, like and especially for games like Overwatch. But to that example though, Overwatch has a problem with finding the next players, right? So they have to fund contenders, which does not make money. And the teams that own contenders teams that don't own OWL teams don't necessarily like it because they're not in the dance. They're like outside the dance, and their players will get poached to go to the dance. So they're like in tier 2. So they have to maybe buy an expansion if they ever get allowed, when those get opened up. So like the farm system is kind of a losing world right now in Overwatch. It's funded a lot by Blizzard and those teams. Because it didn't grow organically, they kind of closed it all down. Where again, to your point, we have FPL, we have the ESEA products, we've got just open we've got all sorts of ways to find players, right? And all that gets limited to a different kind of focus when you start locking it down from the top and bringing it on down. I like to think that even though we play a team game, it's more like golf or more like tennis. Anyone can jump in. Right? Good luck. You're not going to play on the PGA Tour until you do this, this, and this. But like, there's no one stopping someone from becoming a pro golfer. You don't have to be recruited by an owner. You don't have to be an owner, right? Same thing with being a tennis player. So those are individual sports, but I like the organization of them better than like this team model, right? And if anything, I like the European model of football or soccer, if you will, for me, because there's relegation. Right? If you suck, you're going to pay for it, right? You're going to have to drop on down, and you can come. And if you're down and you're really good, welcome to Premier League, baby. That to me would be the only way I would like it. Like the fact that these ones we already have don't have relegation just speaks to me that the team owners made it that way, right? So there was no loss, no chance of losing their investment, right? And again, that just
Yep.
I think that cuts a little competitiveness off. If you don't have to fight for literally your survival in the league, right?
Yeah, and
anyway.
Moving forward some slightly, I really wanted to get your thoughts on maybe it could be like the one team that you think is doing the best when it comes to sort of brand building, merchandising, fan engagement, and all that kind of thing. Because going back into your history, as you described in the previous podcast on part 1, you're part of EG in this amazing. I mean, EG was incredibly prolific from these perspectives and was doing a lot of amazing marketing that no one had really done quite in that way before. That really built the brands like in an incredible way, and the fan base skyrocketed. So is there anyone that's doing it really well right now in your eyes?
I think the big boys are getting it dialed pretty good, that kind of were starting up as I was leaving. I would say like the League of Legends guys, Cloud9 came out of the League of Legends scene. They're probably the biggest brand on the planet right now. And lots of divisions over lots of communities and streamers, lots of merch, lots of fan activation.
What about in the CS:GO scene, specifically, like maybe from like the top 8, top 12 teams or whatever?
I think I would still harken to like Liquid. I would say Fnatic has been building their brand for a very, very long time. G2, I think, although maybe roster issues here and there and performance issues, Carlos is a good brand builder in the sense of the reach of his team. I think it probably doesn't answer your question because you're talking about Counter-Strike, but like obviously one of the biggest brands in Counter-Strike right now is Optic. not for Counter-Strike, mind you, but the Green Wall is like legendary, right? It's kind of unfortunate that they haven't had a breakout superstar success in Counter-Strike, because if the Green Wall got behind that division like it gets behind some of the console division, um, and how the Houston Outlaws are the branded Overwatch team for Optic, they've embraced that franchise like nobody's business. And that's like turning Sauron's eyes on you. They are huge, right? They are Legion. So
How did they accomplish that? How were they able to achieve
YouTube. A lot of the guys like Hector started as a YouTube content creator, right? The owner or CEO now. I think he's kind of sold by the owner anymore. But like there a lot of YouTube content creators. That's kind of how they all started. A lot of the console teams, Envious, big fan brand as well, because again they started console and content creators, right? A lot of these started out of that and just kept growing, right? Because once you learn how to like get people to subscribe to your YouTube and keep them entertained, that's kind of like the secret sauce, right? And so those guys were all ahead of that curve. And
That's so interesting because that is something we don't see a huge amount of. We're starting to see a little bit more, but we don't. That's not really normal, I would say, in Counter-Strike. Like, is it normal? I don't think it is.
No, and I think those brands. I think that golden era of YouTube has probably changed a little bit too. A lot more people on the platform than there were back then. So you couldn't do what Optic did, because that was a place and time in an area void of content, right? And YouTube isn't like in the same platform as it was back then, even 5 years ago, 3 years ago. So, but then you got to look at the historic brands. Like I think Nip did a really good job with coming back, and yes, they're kind of, again, I guess the newest, coolest one would have to be Astralis, right? I mean, obviously they're hitting it on all cylinders. Good branding, good sponsorships, mainstream. If you look at Astralis, okay, so first off, in game they're kicking everyone's ass, right? They have figured out how to play this game, how to train for this game, when to break, when not to break. They seem to be the most mentally stable and prepared team generally. Doesn't mean they don't tilt, doesn't mean they don't always, doesn't mean they lose, they don't lose, but like they seem to have figured out the strategies, right? With outside help with coaching and psychologically, all those things, right? Then if you look at the business side of it, and I know Refresh gotten some grief for, they own too many teams, they're doing this, they're doing that. All that aside, right? The brands they're nailing are like mainstream brands right off the goddamn. Like if you look at Astralis' jersey, it is not full of endemic logos, right? They didn't start with all the usual suspects. They could have gone and got everybody probably. They could have got a drink, they could have got a peripheral, they could have got all that crap, right? Who they land? They land Audi. They land, is it Jack and Jill? It's a European clothing. Jack Jones. Yeah. European clothing brand, right? Those are good hitters, right? Those are different. Those are new and fresh, and so they're doing it in a different way, right? All around. So I think in some regards, that's a brand to keep an eye on, right? But yeah, and who else? I mean, again, like Liquid, I think was right there with us in the StarCraft days, figuring out how to build it. They were, I would say they were behind us, but out of Liquid's StarCraft start, StarCraft 2, I should say, they did have StarCrafters, but really the race between Liquid and EG during StarCraft 2 is, I think, what really kicked Victor into, I want to be a real team owner. I don't want to just be a guy that helps our StarCraft players, right? Like we turned them on to the business of team owning, right? Versus the philanthropy, that's not a word. They were philanthropic team owners because they loved the game of StarCraft, so they would sponsor some Brood War players, right? But with the rivalry that we created between the two of us, I think that's when Victor, and then obviously later, Steve comes and they get investment and the Kirsch and everything all merges together. But I think out of that, they have become a global brand to be reckoned with far beyond their StarCraft roots. Again, to rival, C9. They won the goddamn international last year, and they almost won it again, right? So yeah, I think a lot of our brands do really good, right? No doubt about it. I don't know if that.
You know what? I was going to ask you about gambling, but actually, you know what? Like, I have some other topics which I think would be more interesting and that you probably don't get asked about. So, considering that you get asked about gambling probably all the time, and I knew you're pretty vocal critic
I
on
mean, if I
Twitter
need
about
to,
it.
if I need to say something about gambling, let me know just for your podcast. I can make it quick. Gambling's cool as long as it's legalized, organized, done through proper channels, and we try to keep kids away from the advertisement. It's like, other than that, go proper gambling.
Boom. There we go. so,
Proper,
so
proper legal gambling. The only thing I will
be
say
responsible.
is it's a vice. It is probably one of the worst vices, the worst addictions you can get. If you do get addicted to gambling, you can get addicted to drugs.
Indeed.
You can get addicted to a lot of things. But gambling is a very serious and very dangerous addiction, right? It's very fun if you can maintain it, just like having a few pints with your mates. But people that get sucked in can lose everything, right? And that's why
It gets out from under you so
yeah,
fast.
and again, that's why we want to keep it away from kids till they're old enough to lose their fucking college education, right? But let's let them be old enough, right? I mean, we now see countries banning loot crates, right? Because it's a form of gambling, maybe. So that's my take on it. Just let's keep it to the legalities of it. And I could see to Valve's thing, I could see them maybe starting to limit where it can be advertised because again, we have a huge young base that watches our stuff. And in Europe, and again, it's very global. Europe has a different rule set about gambling on jerseys than we do in North America, right? So it's a very nuanced discussion. But if it's legal, if you're of age doing it and you're doing it on a legal platform that's not going to rip you off, it's not some shady skin thing, then good luck, because it does help our ecosystem in a way, right? When we allow gambling to engage the viewers. Anyway, there you have it.
All right, I think that was nice. That was a good wrap up there. So the last two topics I want to go through are somewhat similar. So again, you've been around for quite some time, so you've seen games come and go. You've seen all sorts of things come and go. But I think two things that have come and gone, which is a really big loss to esports, and they've left the void, I would say, in some respects, is Quake and Starcraft. So I don't know which one you want to start with. Obviously, the stories on both, they have similarities and differences. Starcraft's still around. It's still being streamed, and there's still tournaments, but it's not... It was at one point, if you weren't around, it was at one point the biggest thing. It was the biggest thing. It was the game on Twitch that people would watch, the tournaments that people would watch. So which one do you want to start with, Scoots? You want to start with talking about Starcraft or Quake? Because my first question on both will be, where did it go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, let's do Quake first because it's probably it's not as prevalent now, although it's back. Yeah. So let's do Quake. What do you want to talk about? One of the greatest.
So I think, made. Yeah. So I want you to. So this is the thing, right? Because we have this ecosystem of various disciplines, and I really think that Quake not being, I always sort of likened it to tennis in a way. I mean, obviously, only just because it was just this crazy battle of endurance between two people in a very sort of simplistic arena, even though, of course, the maps change. And it's a 1 versus 1, like FPS 1 versus 1 discipline. So what to you is so compelling about Quake? And do you think that it's just inevitable that we're going to see this again at some point?
Okay, so and we're going to talk about 1v1, right? Not duel, not TDM, not CTF, or I mean, they're all variants.
Yeah, so just to clarify for people, as Scoots mentioned, you do have these team mode variants, and some of them are really interesting and very good in their own right. But from an esports perspective, what people really connected with and where all the hype went, and how it transcended, its own scene and went, into Counter-Strike and have Counter-Strike fans watching Quake or having Dota fans watching Quake was because of the 1v1.
Sure,
it was so easy to understand.
I mean, it's like tennis. I mean, to use your perfect example, like. There's singles and doubles at tennis, but generally in that same tournament, singles is way more popular. People have way more fun. And some of the same people play in both, right? They'll play singles, but then they'll play doubles with somebody. But yeah, it happens, but it's not on the same tier, even though it's the same people sometimes. Both. I mean, I think it's again, much like I always describe Counter-Strike as the guys that made it came up with a set of gameplay situations and tools that made this game lightning in a bottle, right? Just by and Quake is the exact same way. The concept of 1v1 with timers and being able to control various power-ups and various weapons. Like you basically start with jack shit, but everything's out there for you. Depending on the map, obviously not everything's on every map. You know what I mean? But the idea is like here's the map, here's the stuff, here's when they respawn. Here's how you win. here's how you move, and we're going to have an incredible movement system with verticality and speed and skill, and it's lightning in a bottle as well. The game mode in a way is like Duel, but something about Quake Duel versus the copycats. Um, I, it's just amazing because again, you much like any other, much like a sport or any of these esports we really love, you you very quickly can see the shitty, the good, and the great. There is a gap. You and I can go shoot basketball hoops. You and I can't play in the NBA. You and I can go run around a Quake map and shoot each other. We ain't gonna win QuakeCon, right? And that skill gap in that game is dramatic, right? Which is part of its problem, which is probably part of the conversation as well. Is that game is too hard to be good at, and it probably pisses off too many casuals, so that the player base is never big enough to support an esport in the sense of like growing in esport, not just maintaining sport. But it's an amazing game. Like I never played it well. I never tried to get good at it. If anything, I always tried to play the team modes because I had help, right? Like, but loved watching that shit. And the few times I produced it, loved it because again, it is just pure, man. It is pure creamy goodness. When you see some of the best in the world, like, it's just it's bittersweet because again, like, it ain't being watched.
And that's one of it's so interesting in many ways because I think it's the personification of some of the issues that we see at the moment. Because at the moment you have developers finally realizing, I think, that, oh crap, if we make an esports game, we're going to be able to make some money. However, we actually have to make the game also appealing to the masses at the same time. And these are two conflicting issues because you can't make a game that is incredibly accessible and also an incredible esport at the same time. This is one of the reasons why Counter-Strike is a bit special, because one of the trends that we've seen is that in an effort to do this, for example, things have moved further and further towards class-based systems. And in a class-based system, you have inherent limitations in what you can do with your class. So that means that you're sort of just capped on skill in that sense. You're going to have some players that, okay, maybe they're going to have to have like really good communication and team play, but they won't be able to. They won't have to have the ability to do absolutely everything. And this is one of the reasons why Counter-Strike is so interesting. Because if you talk to people will sort of distill things into roles. But at the end of the day, in a Counter-Strike match, when you're playing against the best in the world, you're going to go down to a 4 versus 3, and you can't just say, oh well, our support player died, I'm not going to throw a flash for this other guy. Like it's you have to be able to do everything. And I think that's what really makes the skill ceiling more impressive. That's what makes it more impressive to have a guy that is above everybody else, because that skill ceiling is so high, and so you can see those differences, and so it just creates these amazing storylines of players who somehow in an incredibly competitive game can just be absolute superstars. And the difference is so night and day between them and other professionals that are also gods at the game. And that's something that's very special about, I think, that system, where you don't sort of create an inherent limitation in what someone can do from a movement perspective and a shooting perspective and so on. And that's something that Counter-Strike has managed to keep. And as you're saying, Scoots, as well, one of the things that actually mitigates Counter-Strike keeping these elements and not maybe moving towards these class-based systems which are more accessible is two things. One, inherently it's a team-based game, as you say. Playing with your having some support, even if you're not good at the game, is a good way to have fun and mitigate difference in skill between two teams. And also at the same time, you have this amazing situation where there is variance sort of built into the game. And as you alluded to, in Quake, the only variance is the spawns, and those you can kind of predict and manipulate to a certain extent. So there's not really any randomness. So if you're better than someone, you beat them in Quake. Whereas if you're a better Counter-Strike player, you don't always win.
Yeah, and again, like, now a lot of esports, like the battle royale genre is blowing up, right? And it's all about like, too much RNG, it can't even be an esport. Like, in some regards, like, yeah, you're kind of right, bro, because we come from esports that the RNG is maybe the gun recoil has little RNG and where you spawn might be, but even that randomness is like 8 different spawn spots in Counter-Strike, depending on what side. In Quake, same kind of thing, right? So the randomness is different, right? It's not what's in the house. It's not, well, will this map have a quad on it? No, this map has a goddamn quad on it, right? It's got one. It's just, it's not even random when it spawns. It spawns, and then I grab it X amount of time later, it's going to spawn again, right? And that's, yeah, again, it's, the sad part about it is these games come out of a time frame of eSports when there was way less money. People were being paid less. TOs were giving away less. They weren't, you were paying your own way there. Your team was paying, but they were paying you, you weren't getting paid, or you were being paid less. So the ecosystem financially was so much smaller that we could get away with the people that watched and cared and supported the ecosystem were the people that played the game. And they could be less in the sense of it didn't have to be the most popular game on the planet to be a thriving esport, right? I mean, Quake very quickly became an elitist kind of game because it was so goddamn hard and easier games were coming out, so the casuals were playing them. But it didn't stop its esportness, right? But now that metric is almost essential because the cost of having an esport, paying for a division if you're a team owner or a tournament organizer, throwing the event, putting it on stage, it's at such a high level that you got to start with a chunk of people that will watch, right? And that means you have to have a core base of the game. And if it's just those that are competing, it's generally not enough, right? And so the harder the game is, out of the box, the less casuals are going to ever play it, right? I mean, Dota has been around forever, right? Dota to Dota 2 is not a huge leap of anything, right? It's the same game, right? Different heroes, different changes, right? But you know what I mean? Like, it is essentially still a really hard goddamn MOBA, right? League of Legends found its niche because they made a MOBA for more casual people, right? They made it easier, but it's roughly the same concept of a game, but easier. But then every other MOBA, but after those two, we got a hardcore one, we got a easier one. Both successful esports, right? Any other MOBA outside of that has had a hard time, right? You can't get there's only so much traction there, right? Counter-Strike. Name me another FPS. Well, now you have one. Name me another non-class-based PC shooter that's an esport. I'll wait. There isn't one. Call of Duty on console, right? Call of Duty fits it on console. Name me another console shooter. I'll wait. Gears doesn't really count. Halo isn't hitting the nummy. Halo would be, right? But if you take now PC and go, give me a class-based shooter, I'll give you Rainbow Six, right? And it's doing really, really well. Fits a niche like nothing else, right? There's no game like Rainbow Six out there, right? And so it works, and it's building, it's growing, right? And it's got a developer that is right there with it. I think the problem with Quake, back to the original question, is like Quake has been through so many different versions since the version that I fell in love with and you fell in love with probably, and we thought Quake Live was going to be it, and then now Quake was it Champions now? And again, I watched QuakeCon, I'm like, okay, I just don't feel it the same, It was cool to see a good chunk of people watching it, don't get me wrong, but will it ever get to the same, amazingness that it had before? I don't know. It was really, really cool, totally separately. Watching Dahang and Rafa play on the same team in that 2v2 tournament just blew my mind. Because, again, for years, that's who we were trying to beat. Rafa played for SK, and Dahang played for us at EG. So, like, I loved Shane, but I hated that kid. Because that kid won everything. And it was like, I hate you. Like, I hate you. Let Dahang win. Let Chance win something. Why? I hate you, Shane. Because he was unstoppable back in the day. So to see him on the same team for Liquid was really, really cool. And it seems like...
I actually had it on my podcast recently.
Yeah, and it seems like, and you probably watch more Quake these days than I do, it seems like maybe that new version is getting some legs under it, a little bit of esportiness under it, so maybe there's some hope there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is they sort of just lost the identity of what made Quake very awesome. And so you have to look at it in a different way, almost like you said, sort of just, you have to just separate it and look at it as its own thing, because the magic of what was exciting about it in the past is not really there. It's not there in the same way.
Yeah.
It's just something else now. And I mean, that was because, of this overall overarching point that we're talking about here, where if we're thinking about it, and developers are trying to start to make esports games, and they're trying to deal with these conflicting ideas of, I must create a huge user base of casual players to make the game a success and to make this this monetization model successful, to then support the esports, which is really what I want it to be about. So then I can have a tournament infrastructure to have longevity and build community and make more money through whatever happens with that ecosystem that I create. It's just a very difficult thing to sort of balance between. And I think there are a lot of very good examples out there of ways in which you can mitigate a very high skill ceiling and still make the game accessible. And I think it's a complex thing from a game development standpoint, and I think this is still a very new thing for game developers to think about. I think there are case studies out there. If we look to the old successes, what made StarCraft, Brood War great, what made Quake 3 great, what makes Counter-Strike great now, and if you really try to distill, the way that they have a comeback mechanic, or the way that they have this inherent difficulty, but it's that variance. And okay, what is it about the variance? And I think you touched on it slightly. Another amazing thing about Counter-Strike is that just the fact that the spawns are random, and the spawns inform the decision making of what, maybe instead of always thinking that because the spawns are set, I'm always going to go here because I'm on this left side. It's well, actually I have a slightly faster spawn to these 3 locations this round, and now I have a slightly slower spawn, and I play better in these spots, and then it creates this whole thing about conditioning your opponent, and it creates it supports the metagame. So you're adding some variance, but it's something that the really good players can still overcome consistently and manipulate consistently. And that's something that's very complex to achieve and very nuanced, and I think people are still figuring out. So I'm hoping, I'm optimistic, Scott. I think that we will see our sort of tennis sort of return at some point, but I think it's gonna have to wait until we see that there's already an enormous esports market, and then when the focus can truly be on just developing a crazy ass amazing 1v1 game.
And I think StarCraft again has kind of and obviously it's very much supported by its developer now, right? Obviously, the StarCraft 2 wave, when it first came out, the world grabbed it, right? It was at the confluence of, and obviously StarCraft goes way back, Brood War, but again, not supported by Blizzard, supported by the world, supported by Korea, supported by everybody else, but also again ended up with a very hardcore community that loved and played the game, and for years that was enough to economically sustain it. Right, fast forward, StarCraft 2, game blows up, everyone buys it because again, nostalgia. Twitch, Justin TV, it's not even Twitch yet. Justin TV and Ustream, live streaming and production, all these things are all hitting esports at the same time. Wow, we don't have to buy bandwidth anymore. Holy shit! So everyone's grabbing these games, and League of Legends blows up during this. StarCraft 2 blows up during this. Street Fighter 4 comes out during this, and so that puts StarCraft 2 on the map. It blows up, maybe gets a little bit overinvested in. And I think the developer might have done some stuff and then squash it. You patch things, you do different things. You can kill momentum. They did WCS. They did some things to kind of lock regions, and then didn't lock regions. All the different stuff they did basically kind of hurt some of the momentum. I think on top of that, StarCraft at its core, both versions, less number 2 than 1, suffer kind of from the same problem that Quake has, is at its core, really, really, really hard games to win and be really, really good at, right? To get the victory, to get the win, to get that pat on your back. Very hard in StarCraft. Hard in StarCraft 2 as well, right? So not easy, right? So people get discouraged. I played the campaign. I laddered twice. I got my ass kicked. Nope, not for me. Can't move that fast, right? I didn't ladder. It's not my kind of game, right? So it drowns back down to the hardcore as a viewership base, right? Now, it is now very much, I'll use the word propped up, but that doesn't necessarily mean a negative. But Blizzard runs WCS. It runs the circuit of StarCraft. So if they were not to do it, would anyone throw StarCraft 2 tournaments anymore? I don't know. I don't pay much attention, so I don't know what the viewership's like. But again, it's a much more nuanced game to watch. It's not easy to watch if you don't know, and certainly hard to do well at, to play it. And I think, again, it's kind of funny. Fortnite is the exact opposite right now. Fortnite is a game that is so incredibly popular to the casual. They are now trying to figure out how to make an esport out of it. What esport mode? What do we judge this thing, right? They're shifting an incredibly huge player base to going, hey, let's shine some esports spotlight on this, versus we're talking about how do we get anyone to play it to then care about esports, right? Shoot Mania is the prime example of a company, Ubisoft.
Oh no.
They, again, talk about a company that thought, okay, esports is a big thing. We're going to make an esports title. Everyone will love it. We'll throw marketing money at it. It's going to be a shooter. It's going to be weird and crazy and different. And since it's built for esports and we're a game dev company, it'll be awesome. Nope, you can't do it. You can't build an esport. You got to build a really good competitive game that enough people play that you then figure out how to play it at the highest level. And then it ends up being an esport. And lots of things can be an esport, but how long will they survive and will they be successful financially? And it's again, lightning in a bottle on some of these games, right? I think Counter-Strike is a prime example. These two kids in a dorm that added a money system and then decided, defusal would be cool instead of hostages. Like, they had no idea, right? I mean, Dota started as a mod for Warcraft 3, a Blizzard game. Those guys Ice Frog had no idea. Hey, we'll take this hero idea of Warcraft 3 and let's just make a game of just heroes. Fuck. What?
Yeah.
It's like again, some of our greatest games still played were made as mods of other shit, right? Whereas AAA title game devs are having a hard time making an esport because you don't make an esport. You make a really kick-ass competitive game, multiplayer competitive game. And then we'll help you figure out the rule set and how we should play it. Your player base will help you figure that out, right? So it's tough. Now that it's a buzzword, everyone's trying, right? Everyone's trying to figure it out,
Yeah, it's somewhat of an arms race, I suppose.
Yeah, in a weird way it is, right?
In
a weird way it is. I mean, we've got people getting VC saying they're going to build a brand new game that doesn't exist, esports, new sports, right? New sports is being pitched at us. We're going to make games and we're going to do all this cool shit. Yeah, because being a game developer is really, really, really easy, right? I mean, we have game developers going out of business every other day, making all sorts of games that fail, right? So it's tough. It's to your point probably. So why can't can we just embrace the ones we already know are good? Can we get back to Quake? Because we know that the concept of Quake, dueling in that format, is baller entertainment. So how do we make it baller to play again so we can get it back up there where it belongs? Right?
I actually think that Fortnite is maybe one of the best possible things that could have happened in that sense, because it's going to make so many people arcade FPS literate. Fortnite is closer to Quake than it is to Counter-Strike or pretty much anything else in esports, I would say. Well, it is, because in Fortnite as well, like it's the same as Quake. Everyone starts with the same thing. It's not class-based. And so the only other arcade FPS that's esportsified is Overwatch. So I'm hoping that more things that are similar sort of spawn out of that. But I guess it remains to be seen. I'm really curious actually, because on your opinion about StarCraft, because StarCraft obviously is an incredible story, and the fact that it happened in the way that it did, like Brood War, that is just it's just hard to even wrap your head around it. The timing in Korea, like how the scene build up that game in Korea and so on and so forth is amazing. But did you ever really get into watching Brood War? Because when I got into it in 2008, when Tasteless first went over and we first had our English commentary consistently of all the Pro League matches in South Korea, I was, after a couple months of learning the ropes, I was just sucked in, and it can still be the most exciting thing I can watch sometimes. It's incredible.
I got in very, very late to the end of Brood War. Again, not really as a gamer, the game type that I liked to play, so didn't really invest much time into watching others play it in that sense. Just a little bit. I mean, I knew it was going on. I would, tune in for the big craziness, but really, in all honesty, wasn't till EG and StarCraft 2 that I really got into the game itself and the strategies of it and how badass it was. And then what that led me to was, wow, I'm late. This game sucks compared to that game, Brood War, right? Because hanging out with the players, and then I probably watched more Brood War stuff during those days, old clips, than watched it while when it was kind of Brood Warring, if that makes sense, right? And more of a historical factor than a while it was kind of going on factor for me. More catch up, right? Because again, I would just, you know, Counter-Strike 1999, I didn't really stop. And yeah, and I just wasn't a big RTS guy. Played it, bought it. I was like, click, nope, I want to go shoot someone in the head. Just not my game type. Still to this day, not RTS, not really my game type. Although I will watch like some of the tournaments still, right? But I haven't kept up with patches or anything with the races, so I have no idea on some of the fans.
And that's almost like the class thing actually, but the RTS version with StarCraft 2, because StarCraft 2 became like really complex and like this guy can do this, and this, and there's this unit that's flying around that can do all this kind of stuff. But in Brood War, it's like half of the units in the game are useless.
Yeah.
So you pretty much only see it's just like the fundamentals that make it so compelling. And there's so many constant skirmishes, and the skill ceiling is so high. It's just another instance of, I don't know how it got so popular because of how hard it was, but because it did get so popular and people were just playing it because it was a sport and it's all about the skill and the spectacle of the skill and raising up the skill above everything else. And then you really see what human beings can do with it. Then your jaw drops to the floor and you're like, oh my God, this is so entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
I'm never going to play this. I mean, I'm not going to play this, but it's so easy to understand because, again, like unlike, a League of Legends, for example, where there's these particle effects going off all over the place. With Brood War, with some competent commentary, you don't need to watch that much to just get it after like a pretty short time.
Agreed. You very quickly figure out the three races and where their strengths and weaknesses are. And with good commentary, you're right along with the ride. In some regards, StarCraft
and all the changes with the maps as well.
And again, it's one of those, I think that it's a victim of its own non-casual success in some regards. Again, it's like a restaurant, right? Like a restaurant will be successful the more regulars it has that come to it on a regular basis, because then anyone else is like extra gravy, right? Like you always need your regulars to keep your restaurant open, right? So the more regulars a game has, the more of those regulars are going to tell their friends about it, the more they're going to tune into the top level of it, and again, care about the esport. And I think that's, you grow the fan base of the game, you basically instantly grow the fan base of the esport by percentage, right? Simple as that.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to finish on. We've been going for about an hour and a half, so awesome. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining me for part 2.
My pleasure.
I think if there's going to be a part 3, it's going to be in London. So
all right.
you're off to DreamHack as well, right?
Yeah, I'm going to DreamHack to just attend the Counter-Strike thing, and then I'm presenting one of the awards at that Stockholm eSports Awards.
That's awesome.
Present, and I'm up for an award too, but like so is Ninja. Ninja's in the same category as me.
I saw that. Yeah, that's amazing.
Let's just talk about this for a second. So I got nominated. It's called like Profile of the Year, and really it's because of the Player Association, because I've been the spokesperson for it. So I'm nominated for the Player Association to be the spokesperson for it. Richard's nominated for E-League, his host work, the Major, and all his stuff last year. Shivers nominated for all her work in Dota, and obviously her story, cancer victim, like surviving through tragedy. It's all these, like it's not like stream. It's not meant to be streamer or tournament. It's like a weird kind of category. So then Shiver's on it. Shroud's on it for his transition from pro Counter-Strike to pro streamer, and how explosive it was for him. And Ninja's on it for his year of explosion, right? So I get the list. First I got asked to just be a presenter. I'm like, oh shit, yeah, if you'll pay my way, I'll be a presenter. Like, what am I presenting? They're like, oh, I think Tournament of the Year. I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, I'd love to, and your nominees are like, and I'm like, wait, it's the day after the tournament. Can you fly me earlier? Will you pay my hotel? Now I get a free Counter-Strike tournament out of it. So then, like, a week later, I find out that I'm actually nominated for something. I'm like, well, what am I fucking nominated for? And I get the list. I'm like, oh, I will get 5th place. This is the one, Dan, to do James. This is the one category of this particular company's like awards that are the public vote. The public vote has Ninja, Shroud, Shiver, Richard, and then me. The only 2 that could win would be Shroud and Ninja on a public. It's a public vote. Their communities are huge. Shiver has a chance. Dota's big, and she's a very good feel-good story. obviously surviving cancer, and she's a badass chick. But like, how does Ninja not win this category, right? All he has to do is tweet it, and like he'll win the vote. So then I'm like,
Yeah,
okay,
that's what I was
well,
thinking too.
I guess it's the old cliche. It's just good to be nominated, because there's no fucking way I'm winning this one. But then also the Player Association itself is nominated for Moment of the Year. It's like the newsworthy items of the year category, if you will.
Interesting.
And so the players forming it made the category. Fortnite announcing 100 million is one. Cloud9 winning the major in Boston is one of the moments, like 5 moments. I don't know if we'll win that one either, but it's just cool to be nominated for that one, and cool to be nominated in the other one. I'm certainly not going to beat Ninja, but it's kind of funny. So yeah, I'll be in Stockholm to check out some Counter-Strike, do a little PA work as well, and then come home for a week, and then back to catch the end of your tournament, the end of the major.
Awesome.
Yes.
That's awesome. I just love the idea of honoring just these important moments and people in esports. I think that's really awesome, especially to people looking in from the outside, because esports is a very wholesome place. Sometimes it's hard to see that, but I think at its core, as it is so grassroots, it's very hard to throw a rock into esports and not hit just passion, just people oozing with passion about it. And I think that is one of the reasons why. In fact, that's the prime reason that we all got into it.
Absolutely.
So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I look forward to seeing you in London, and I hope you have an awesome time in Sweden. I'll see you then.
Sounds good, brother. Be safe till then.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with SirScoots. His insights are simply indispensable, and I'm sure I'm going to have him on again in the near future for another podcast. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, you could help me out by liking it, by subscribing to the various channels in which it goes out on, but also, tell your friends about it if you think they'd enjoy it. Throw a link to them so they give it a listen as well, and we can continue to grow the community around this podcast. Of course, other ways to support me will include the Patreon that I have up. So if that's something that you feel as though you'd like to check out, it is patreon.com/DDK eSports. So of course, I am going to be casting the major, and this is going to be taking place over the next 3 weeks. So this will give me ample opportunities to sit down with a variety of different types of guests, whether that be players or whether it be talent or industry people as well. I'm looking to try to record as much as I can, time permitting. Of course, the schedule is always very, very packed, and everyone's always very, very busy. So it can be difficult, but I'm going to try my best. So keep your eyes open for that. And of course, I will have, hopefully some, previews each week. That's what I want to do. So we'll see how that goes. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one.